In fact, I want to spend some time on the what he said at the start, right, which is the Boris Karloff 1932 movie. This was off of the back of a decade of a renewed interest in Egyptology, which was triggered by the 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter, sponsored by Lord Carnarvon. Also, another way in which the movie sort of makes a reference to Tutankhamun is Anck-Senamun. The name is that it comes from Anke-Senamun, which is the name of Tutankhamun's wife, and not.
Okay.
I mean, if you were to be, if you were to get pedantic about real history, that's where you get the name from. And again, Tutankhamun, Anck-Senamun both refer to the god Amun, Amun-Ra, which is again a god whose name you hear in the movie. In fact, I think Tutankhamun's dad Akhenaten is also a pivotal figure in Egyptian history, because he tried to pivot the religion away from the worship of Amun to the worship of Aten, which was a god he favored. So there's a whole lot of intrigue and a whole lot of reasons why Akhenaten and the Tutankhamun are so pivotal to the direction that Egyptian royalty took. And obviously there was the subsequent air quotes curse of Tutankhamun, which got a lot of airtime, got people interested. So it was on the back of all of this that I guess Universal Pictures capitalized on this buzz and decided to come up with this, Hall of Horrors, whatever, the Gallery of Horrors, starting with the Mummy. That said, the history of Western fascination with the mummies goes back a little further than even the 1920s. In fact, the 1920s were a spike in interest after a brief dip in the preceding 20-30 years, because back in the Victorian era, 1860s to 1880s, mummies were really big, because the Victorian era was when there was this golden age of rediscovery of historical artifacts across the world, like Mesopotamia, Levant, Egypt. All of the sites of ancient civilization were now primarily under British control, right? British, French control, and therefore these European colonists had this whole idea of sending scientists and archaeologists to kind of figure out history of civilization. And that's when a lot of this came to light. And in fact, mummies were a big thing in Victorian England. There was, but they were not handled with the sort of care that archaeologists would have today. Victorians are a lot more blasé about archaeological or preservation standards. In fact, they used to make paint pigments out of the flesh of mummies that they would recover. There was a pigment shade called mummy brown, which when you read about it today, like, these priceless artifacts were just making paint out of them. But it was also because Egyptian locals found that, hey, these mummies that we have lying around so abundantly seem to be fetching a lot of money with the white folks. So they also used to have these grave diggers who would raid tombs, pilfer treasures or mummified bodies themselves and sell them to the Brits. So there was this whole wave of fascination with mummies in Victorian England, which sort of dipped in the 1910s and 1900s. Then again with Tutankhamun's tomb's discovery, it again spiked up. And then the movies, sort of rode that wave. I think you had the Boris Karloff movie in 32. You had the Hammer films across the 50s and 60s. You had a bunch of spin-offs using the concept of mummies in sort of parody films as well. And then with 99, I guess it all sort of culminated into what, at least for most of us, is the definitive, the Mummy film series with Brendan Fraser. So while it might seem like a recent phenomenon, I just wanted to highlight the fact that there's a long history of Western fascination with mummies, with Egyptology and Egyptian history at large.